Texture filtering is one of the oldest graphics options around, and one of the most mysterious. People either leave it as is, or they ramp it up to maximum to feel good about themselves. There's no middle ground with this option. This is a graphics setting that's typically found in the graphics menu right next to anti-aliasing, and only now have I just realised how similar the two settings are, because anti-aliasing decides how the edges of stuff is drawn and smoothed, while texture filtering decides how the objects themselves are drawn and smoothed. And if you don't turn it up high enough, then it'll make textures look blurry, even if you have your texture settings turned way up. So what is it? Look at this lovely texture. So it needs to be drawn in high quality like this when it's viewed close up. But what if it's a long way away like this? Now it doesn't need to be drawn at such a high quality. This is where MIP mapping comes in. MIP mapping creates lower resolution versions of a texture, which it can use in distant places, which will speed your computer up. And counterintuitively, these lower quality images can also look better, because instead of millions of different coloured pixels fighting to be displayed on a single pixel on your screen, which can cause distracting shimmering should there be the slightest movement, it's far better just to get the average of all these pixel colours, which is sort of what a lower resolution texture does. So that's great, but it doesn't just have to be distant textures. You can also do it to close-up ones, which are displayed at skewed angles, since you won't notice when they look so squished already. The problem is, how do you transition between one quality of texture and another? Well, the fastest way of doing this in modern games is to use bilinear filtering, and it's rubbish. Check out these paving stones and how quickly that black line between them goes all jazzy. You can pretty much see the lines where it jumps from one version of the texture to another. Not cool. If only there was a way of more smoothly fading between each different version. And that's what trilinear filtering does. It doesn't extend the draw distance at all, but it does at least fade between the different texture qualities more correctly and smoothly than bilinear does. But then we get on to antistrophic filtering, or anisotropic filtering if you bother to read it properly. And this is such a simple yet clever idea that even those of you who don't care about any of this stuff will still appreciate it. Look at the shape of this texture. Which quality of the texture should it be using here? Should it be using this high-res version or this low-res one? Well, with anisotropic filtering, there's a third option, and that's to use one that looks more like this. Sure, this version is still using 16 times more pixels than the smaller image would have done, but it's still 16 times smaller than the high-resolution image would have been, whilst looking almost as good. Anisotropic filtering goes all the way from 2 times up to 16 times, which means it will collect a staggering 16 samples per texel, whatever that means. You can see in practice, going up each setting improves the draw distance of the textures, giving them a sharper look further out into the distance. But even 16 times has its limits. So what if you want more than 16 times? Tough. The world has decided that 16 samples per texel is as high as you should crank this setting. But it is tied to resolution, as you can see from this comparison where I dropped to a lower resolution and therefore it looks worse. So if you really want better anisotropic filtering, then you can brute force it with a higher resolution. The problem is, all these skewed variations means that anisotropic filtering needs to remember more different versions of each texture, which can slow your PC down by not much. Like I said, you might as well whack it up to the maximum. I booted up my second rig, which I described as being a mid-range gaming PC from 6 years ago, and this is the frame rate on different maps, using different levels of texture filtering. I tried to get a mixture of old maps, new maps, and massive maps with plenty of draw calls. Lots of great testing decisions made there, very proud of myself. But at 720p low settings, the texture filtering setting didn't seem to make any sort of difference at all, apart from on Assault where it was like 2% slower at 16 times AF. 720p high settings showed a drop on Ancient, but strangely not on Scirocco. The interesting result was at 1440p high settings, where the PC was finally getting GPU limited, and it's here that you can see texture filtering started impacting performance. Though, curiously, it did so most on the older and easier to run maps. So there you go. Texture filtering can affect frame rates, and looking online it seems like source-based games are the worst offenders. I can't test Source 2 since it's tied to all sorts of other graphical options as well, but Valve's emphasis on implementing texture streaming and all that suggests to me that they're aware of this problem and are taking steps to reduce its impact. What can I say? I think higher texture filtering settings are well worth the usually minimal performance penalty that they come with. But to see how it affects your particular setup using your chosen settings and your own aspect ratio and resolution, you'll just have to test it for yourself. Oh, and it's probably worth mentioning that texture filtering is broken in CSGO. Bilinear and trilinear were the same, and so was 2, 4 and 8 times anisotropic filtering. And then 16 times was different as well. So it turns out that with my secondary rig, I had unintentionally tested every variation of texture filtering with just 3 different settings. It's strange because it worked fine in Counter-Strike Source. So how about that? It took until Counter-Strike 2 for me to discover this particular bug with CSGO. That's because I just whack it up to 16 times and forget about it, as you should too. Which reminds me, Counter-Strike 2. At this point you might be asking, what's the difference between texture filtering and texture quality? It looks like they're two of the same thing, and in a way they are linked. Which might be why Valve has made the decision to do away with texture filtering as being an option you can choose for yourself. It's now just part of the texture setting. Low preset is very clearly using bilinear filtering because the transitions between the different qualities look awful. As a believer that highest preset should turn everything up to highest, I suppose I should support lowest preset setting everything to lowest, but bilinear seems like such an unnecessary compromise here in 2023. Prisoners have been treated better. Medium preset clearly uses trilinear, since the transitions are now much smoother. So this suggests that they fixed it since CSGO, which, like I said, doesn't seem to know the difference between bi and tri. So this definitely looks better than low preset simply for this reason, but it's still a blobby showing for what should be medium preset in a game from 2023. But both of these presets have a horrible problem. At lower resolutions, it drops part of your hand model down to a lower resolution, which itself would be okay were it not for the high resolution versions right next to it. Look at this! I can draw where the transition occurs. Not that I have to, since it's pretty obvious where it is already. So this happens on low and medium texture preset. In a game from 2023, it's particularly evident on this green fabric, and it can be mitigated by running the game at a higher resolution or simply by using the high texture preset instead. I can't say I'm used to seeing this kind of problem. I don't know if it's Counter-Strike 2's higher resolution textures that are causing this, or their miserly texture filtering options, but it's definitely left me with a sour taste in my mouth, and I'm not sure if I can ever trust Valve with anything ever again. It's really curious that higher resolutions can fix this, because say you're gaming at 720p and have this problem, switching it to 1440p will fix, or at least improve it. But then, so will 1440p with FSR set to performance, which should be 720p, but clearly not in every way. I never thought I'd be suggesting FSR as a way to overcome aggressive texture filtering, and it probably isn't what you wanted to hear when you woke up this morning. But we're here now, and we just have to deal with it, I'm afraid. And switching to high texture preset, we see anisotropic filtering. Not the greatest setting of it, mind. I'd hazard a guess and say it's 4 times. And very high finally gets us to the big numbers. Hopefully 16 times, but I've been burned by highest presets before. The worst offender being Deus Ex Mankind Divided, which only lets you choose anisotropic, which in my opinion is good, but then it does this annoying thing where even the highest preset still only sets it to 8 times. Why? Why would they do this? Every other graphics option is set to the highest, and that includes all the super demanding framerate sapping ones, so why, in the name of all that is holy, would they troll players by restricting something as tame as texture filtering? Oh my god, it's been 6 years and it still pisses me off. This phenomenon has made it to meme culture too. There was a great video of someone farting on 8 times anisotropic filtering, and 2kliksphilip also made a whole Digital Foundry parody video about this very thing. So I'm pleased it's not just me who gets annoyed about this stuff. I don't think people got the humour at the time, but hopefully now, armed with the knowledge of what anisotropic filtering is and the fact that the video is a parody, you can start to appreciate one of his finest works. And 2kliksphilip's one's good as well.
I'm Philip.